Brittonic source. Geoffrey of Monmouth's transcription of the ancient book from Brittany appears to provide the only British record of the island's interaction with Rome prior to British clergy's forced exile by the Roman Church circa 431. It is therefore imperative that its contents are analysed and considered in conjunction with the relevant contemporary classical texts. Ultimately, the source's value will be judged by its ability to provide illuminations which are reasonably supported by existing literary and archaeological evidence. This chapter will focus solely on what the Brittonic source reports on the state of Britain and its relationship with Rome during and after the Caesarian invasions. First and foremost, the conspicuous disunion between the accounts of Caesar and those sourced from the expatriate community in Brittany is paradoxically reassuring. As already discussed previously, Caesar's position at the time of his invasions of Britain was precarious, and it would be highly presumptuous to treat his reports as candid. Nevertheless, even his most lavish stories necessitated fundamental and evidential truths. Beyond Caesar, the classical sources are underwhelming in size but not in scope. Suetonius's contributions on Britain are frustratingly meagre and confusing when read in isolation, but reveal priceless insights into British history when read in conjunction with the Brittonic source. The latter's provision of key information on individuals within the British monarchy from the 1st century BC is revelatory. Their relationships had a dramatic effect on the future relations which began and developed between Britain and Rome after the Caesarian invasions. Geoffrey's transcription provides a British royal lineage which has a mythical origin, typical of all early societies, but nonetheless, and by the time of Caesar's invasions, presents relevant and significant individuals. Their respective regal status and their association with specific events are confirmed through erudite reading of Caesar's commentaries, but are often camouflaged behind his purposeful ambiguity. Predominant figures amongst the Britons would be one such example, where the Brittonic source illuminates certain truths within the commentaries. Caesar's economic use of such truths in his political campaigning is unremarkable. Indeed, it remains a common characteristic amongst ambitious politicians to this day. Caesar's presentation of Britain as an island of warring tribes insinuates a society devoid of a specific hierarchical structure. He revealingly, however, only specifically identifies one individual who had the chief command and administration of the war, which was, by common consent, conferred upon Cassibelanus. Caesar's single monarchical reference to this prince whom all Britons trusted with the whole conduct of the war injects the necessary acknowledgement of Cassibelanus's royal lineage, without compromising Caesar's own self-aggrandizement. The only other Briton named in the commentaries is Mandubratius from the Trinobantes, who had fled for protection to Caesar in Gaul, that he might avoid the fate of his father Emmanuentius, whom Cassibelanus had put to death, and who wished to be restored to governance of his state. The heavy influence of the commentaries on the later Historia is quite evident with regard to this particular reference. Putting aside the Romanized names for the briefest moment, the Brittonic source provides invaluable clarity. Trinobantes, found both in Caesar's report and the later Historia, is simply not in the original Brittonic transcript. Indeed, all of the later publications have inserted Trinobantes where the original reads Lindane or London. This subtle but significant modification changes the dynamics of the supplicant who sought succor from Caesar. Mandubratius, according to the Brittonic source, was in fact the eldest son and heir apparent to the British throne, and is called Afarwi in the original text. He was the eldest of the two sons of the preceding British king, Lud, and nephew to the current king, Caswallon, referred to by Caesar as Cassibelanus. Afarwi, Mandubratius, had not succeeded his father to the throne on account of his age. Nonetheless, he had been duly recognized by his uncle as Prince of London, his father's capital, and his territories incorporated the southeast of the island as far as the Thames. His younger brother, who escaped Caesar's direct attention in the commentaries, was similarly granted the southwest. However, and as Caesar openly acknowledges, Cassibelanus had retained by common consent the auspices of the crown, even after Mandubratius had clearly come of age, and had effectively assisted Cassibelanus's resistance of Caesar at Dover and the Thames. The commentaries report that Mandubratius was seeking restoration patently implies that he had, until Cassibelanus sought his death, enjoyed a notable degree of sovereignty. Nevertheless, and despite his pre-existing primacy in London and the southeast, Caesar and Mandubratius clearly recognized Cassibelanus's position as the legitimate British monarch. At no point is it reported that Mandubratius sought to usurp Cassibelanus, but rather he had appealed for protection against him and restoration to his previous condition. Additionally, the commentaries claim that Mandubratius held Cassibelanus responsible for putting his father to death, suggests a considerably more complex history between the two than Caesar chooses to relate. Despite his vagueness, Caesar's fundamental acknowledgement of Mandubratius and Cassibelanus's complicated relationship was particularly important and necessary. This was primarily because of Britain's extensive international trade network. Their wide commercial audience inadvertently tempered the contents of Caesar's reports and restricted incredible assertions. Caesar inserted fundamental facts, but willfully overwhelmed them with vain pomposity. He could not, for example, very well claim that he had single-handedly dispatched Cassibelanus and laid waste to Britain. His opponents would have easily and justly exposed him as a fantasist, discredited his prospects, nullified his ambitions, and quite possibly seen him imprisoned or assassinated. Caesar, therefore, astutely included Cassibelanus and Mandubratius in his commentaries, but ensured that their royal status and interconnection remained camouflaged amongst his ostentatious accounts. Nevertheless, both sources concur that Cassibelanus, was indeed king of Britain during the Caesarian invasions. The Brittonic source, however, contextualizes his accession to the throne and elucidates, without confliction, that which Caesar reports. Caswallon was the second of three brothers. Lud, being the eldest, had preceded his brother's reign, while Ninor was the youngest of the three and had died of his injuries following the initial Roman invasion at Dover. Whilst he was king, Lud fathered two sons, Apharwi and Tenephan, but died during their minority, and Caswallon was preferred to the kingdom as a regency figure. Both sources recognize him as such, and report him as being popular, successful, and ruling by common consent. Again, however, the Brittonic source provides more understanding by reporting Caswallon's altruistic ascription of large and significant territories to his nephews. Nevertheless, and according to both sources, he ultimately retained the crown and assumed sovereignty over the heir apparent, Apharwi, Mandubratius. This precarious relationship became significantly strained after Caesar's failed second invasion. According to the Brittonic source, large-scale celebrations and games were held in London after the successful defeat of Caesar's renewed and enlarged invasion attempt. Amid the revelry, a quarrel sprang up between two young nobles. One was a nephew of Caswallon, and the other a nephew of Apharwi called Caehillin. The latter killed the former after their contest turned sour. Caswallon was enraged and demanded Apharwi's relation be brought before him for judgment. Apharwi refused and instead wished to exercise the judgment of his own court in London. Caswallon was indignant and besieged London with his army, whilst Apharwi fled to the southeast and on to Gaul. The commentaries confirm that the latter contacted Caesar in Gaul and appealed to him to revisit Britain a third time, where he would receive Apharwi's assistance in making Britain a tributary in exchange for Caesar's protection against Caswallon. The Brittonic source elucidates on the agreement reported in the commentaries. Apharwi sent Kynon, his son, and 32 hostages of British nobles to Caesar as a pledge of his sincerity. Convinced, Caesar returned with his army. They were duly welcomed onto the Kentish shore by Apharwi, who assisted Caesar in bringing Caswallon to terms, according to both sources. The Brittonic source adds that after a peace and tribute were agreed, Apharwi immediately abdicated his position as heir apparent and went to Rome with Caesar and Kynon, while Caswallon reigned a further 7 years. Tenephan, Duke of Cerniu, son of Lud, and brother to the now absent heir apparent Apharwi, succeeded Caswallon as king of the Britons. The Brittonic source covers this reign in less than a sentence, and the extant classical sources do not record the period at all. Therefore, we can only assume that it was unremarkable. Nevertheless, he was succeeded by Cynvelin, also known as Cymbeline and Cunobelinus, who had been brought up by Caesar. The Brittonic source informs that beyond measure Cynvelin loved the men of Rome, so that he did not dislike to pay the tribute to them. Cynvelin's unreported birth during his predecessor's reigns, his uncontested accession, and his inexhaustible love for Rome are all remarkable and unusual features. However, the semantic similarity between the three significant individuals, Cynvelyn, Cehilin, and Cynan, appears to provide an explanation for this peculiarity. Cehilin, the Brittonic source informs us, was the nephew of Afarwi, who killed Caswallen's nephew following a wrestling match. In order to protect his relation, Afarwi was willing to see his capital besieged and go to the extraordinary lengths of seeking the protection of Caesar. The sacrifices that Afarwi unswervingly made in order to protect this relation suggests that Cehilin was not a nephew, but was in fact his son, Cynan. After being instrumental in the two successful defeats of Caesar's invasion attempts, Afarwi's change of allegiance was greeted with expected skepticism by Caesar. However, given the former's predicament regarding Caswallon and his innate compulsion to protect his son and heir, Afarwi recognized only one option. In order to protect his son, he must betray his country. The commentaries confirm Afarwi's visit to Caesar in Gaul, where he pledged hostages. The Brittonic source goes further and reveals that the hostages included his son and heir, Cynan. It appears, therefore, that Cehilin, Cynan, and Cynvelyn are all in fact one and the same. The evident deception in the Brittonic source over Cynvelyn's misrepresented history, considering Afarwi's actions, is understandable. Afarwi's insistence to protect his relation and invite civil war, his decision to betray his country and pledge his son to Caesar, his decision to accompany his enemy and hostage son to Rome immediately after securing Britain's tribute, presents a litany of inglorious deeds and reinforces the claim that Cehilin was in fact his son. The difference in spelling between Cehilin, Cynan, and Cynvelyn is immaterial, especially considering that uniform spelling of words and names in the English language was resisted until relatively recently. Nevertheless, once Tenophan had succeeded to the throne and ruled for approximately 45 years in his brother's absence, Afarwi's son returned and acceded to his legitimate position as king of the Britons. The Brittonic source reports that after Cynvelyn had reigned 12 years, there were born to him two sons, Guida and Gwyrid, or Guiderius and Arviragus, to give them their Romanized names. Renaissance fabulists bastardized the latter's name further, giving us Prasutagus, to whom they also ascribed a wife, Boudica. This fictional queen of the Iceni was fancifully introduced to British history during the Renaissance. She arose from the machinations of the author of Tacitus, who ignorantly or imaginatively corrupted Gildas' animal metaphor of Britain as a deceitful lioness. The character was embraced by subsequent Renaissance authors, including Polydore Virgil, but nevertheless appears to be nothing more than another Renaissance creation. The vast majority of the Brittonic source focuses on the respective interactions between Caswallon and Caesar, and Arviragus and Claudius. There is, however, another significant individual of presumed royal heritage, Adminius. He does not feature directly in the Brittonic source, although he may well be alluded to, but he is found in the classical sources. Strabo confirms the notion, found in the Res Gestae Augustus, that Britons had gained the friendship of Caesar Augustus through embassies and paying court to him. Suetonius's is more specific, and reports that Caligula received the surrender of Adminius, a son of Cunobelinus, king of the Britons, who had been banished by his father and had gone over to the Romans with a few followers. Suetonius subsequently, and intriguingly, reports that Britain was in uproar early in Claudius's reign because of the Roman refusal to return certain fugitives. A coincidence we shall revisit after identifying a final person of interest. One very interesting character, who plays a key role in Caesar's achievement of a tribute from Britain, is Cingetorix. According to Caesar, he was based in Gaul and was the son-in-law of Indutiomarus, the leader of a powerful Belgic tribe, the Treviri, during the Gallic Wars. Cingetorix does not feature whatsoever in the Brittonic source. However, his location and relationship with Caesar is what makes him especially relevant and revealing. Before the second invasion, Cingetorix visited Caesar and assured him that he and all his party would continue firm to their duty and never abandon the interest of the Romans, or indeed his own ambition to usurp his father-in-law. Once Mandubracius had sought out an alliance with Caesar in Gaul, and both had returned and besieged Caswallon, Cingetorix re-enters the commentary's narrative. Caesar reports that Cingetorix was one of the 4 kings who Cassibelanus calls on to suddenly fall upon the naval camp of the Romans. According to the commentaries, the British attack on the naval fort was betrayed and a great slaughter ensued, which was allegedly instrumental in Cassibelanus coming to terms. Curiously, Cingetorix survived the slaughter unharmed and was returned safe to the camp. Despite Caesar's customary ambiguity, this Cingetorix is patently the same individual who aligned himself with Rome prior to the second invasion. Cingetorix's treachery towards his kinsman and his overt betrayal of Cassibelanus is confirmed by his subsequent conviction as a public enemy by the Council of Gauls and the confiscation of his entire estate.